In this video, we're going to talk very broadly about substance use epidemiology and survey strategies used when people are conducting addiction epidemiology. I realize many of you may have taken the companion course to this policy course, Substance Use Epi. So we won't go into too detail, and really this is the 1 week we're going to focus on this type of information. So epidemiology of drug use, basically we're asking who is using what where. We're also asking how is the substance being used, because there's differences between the different types of illicit drugs and how they're consumed, as well as differences between the illicit drugs, the legal drugs, and the legal and illicit drugs. On top of it, the same drug can be used multiple different ways. So by going through the epidemiology of drug use, it's not always enough just to say that X amount of people are using marijuana or opioids or cocaine. We also might want to know how they're using it to determine if there's increased risk from the type of consumption that they're performing. For instance, smoking versus eating versus consumption versus injection drug use. We are interested with the harms associated with substance use, and we'll talk about these in more detail in a different video. But again, different substances have different harms and affect people in different ways, and we want to know who's most at risk from what substances and who may be at greater risk from the same substance. Now, in this course and in the idea of addiction epidemiology, we're going to try to cover everything possible under this umbrella. So that includes illicit drugs like alcohol and tobacco. Marijuana is kind of that borderline substance right now. Some areas are legalizing recreational use, many others still keep it illegal. And then we're going to talk about illicit substances, so cocaine and amphetamines, as well as other products which again are that borderline, so opioids. There are legal opioids that can be obtained. That's prescription drugs essentially, but you can use them for illegal consumption, using them outside of those prescriptions. So we're going to talk about those too throughout this course. And then finally, this information is obtained, so who is using what and when and how is obtained primarily through self-report. We're asking people about their substance use history. These are just a couple questions. I pulled them from the Youth Risk Behavior Survey that's conducted by the CDC here in the United States. And we kind of need to take all this information with a grain of salt because it is self-report. So it's prone to many biases. Things like recall bias, social desirability bias, all of these things will play into the accuracy of the data that we collect. Now, we can get a pretty good estimation of what is going on and how much substance use is actually being consumed in the population by using different methods, by identifying people in different ways, by using different samples. And if they all kind of coalesce around a single point or give us a very narrow range of prevalence and incidence rates, then we can be reasonably confident we have accurate data. If everything's scattered all over the place, we may have to reassess how the data is collected. So the majority of this information is through self-report. At times, we can find information through medical records. The use and proliferation of electronic medical records has made this much easier. We can also use death certificates, so if they're filled out accurately and completely, we know someone has died, but the information about why he's died isn't always 100% accurate. But we can use those to confirm self-report or to identify different information as well. More rarely used, less used, is chemical testing. And while this might be the most accurate, it certainly is going to be most accurate than self-report because we can actually test people for what metabolites are in their system. There's two downfalls. One, it's more expensive, and two, it's time dependent. So the half-lives of different substances are not the same. And we may only be able to determine the past day or the past week use rather than the past month or the past year use, because if you use cocaine once 11 months ago, there's not going to be any of those cocaine metabolites left in your system to be able to be picked up by these tests. So if you combine all of these methods, you hope to kind of coalesce and find a very narrow range of values in terms of prevalence rates of substance use in the types of substance, not only the types of substance uses, but how people are using them. But none of them are perfect. And that's the kind of key takeaway of this slide, is that each has pluses and minuses, pros and cons, and you really need to make the best decisions possible in order to get accurate data.